Okay, back again to talk a little bit more about American history and the Great Depression. We've talked about the basic causes of the Great Depression. We've talked about the trigger event that caused it to happen in the fall of 1929, but it lasted for a good decade after 1929. What was it like in Great Depression America? Well, jobless men couldn't get jobs. They were dispossessed and displaced, looking for work, and they went to places where they couldn't get jobs. They were high and dry and lived in camps here and there wherever they could, doing whatever they could to survive. And often they were subject to just the charity of maybe getting a loaf of bread, maybe every other day, maybe every 3 or 4 days to live on. Times were tougher than we can imagine. We understand that times are tough during this COVID year. Many people have lost their regular work. A lot of tough times, and it's not to minimize any of that, but compared to the Great Depression, not the same degree, not the same level. So what was it like? Well, there were bread lines popped up and soup kitchens and donuts and coffee kitchens popped up overnight. It was where many Americans got the only thing they had to eat in a day at a free kitchen such as that. More and more workers were laid off. Charities, this is not government stuff, it's churches. It's much like the food pantry over at the Methodist Church in Middlefield. It is an outreach effort to do something about this, but it's not like the food pantry in this sense. It is serving daily food for people to get by for 24 hours, for the next 48 hours, to be able to continue to get some sustenance. It isn't where you could go and get groceries and take them home. Many of these people, maybe by this time, have lost their homes. And you see the lines just are lengthy. Look at all these guys. Look at some of them look like workmen. Some of them look like bankers or executives themselves. This is something that has cut a swath across society. Breadline. Huge. Kind of an ironic picture here. I'm sure it was taken with this in mind. All these people are standing in line to get a handout, and it says world's highest standard of living on the billboard. There's no way like the American way, and here they are driving happily along, and these people are hoping to get a handout so they can get by for the day or the week. So the economy has stopped functioning for people. So the question would immediately arise, what does President Hoover do? Well, remember, he believes in laissez-faire, so he's not really equipped to want to jump in and overhaul how the government runs the economy. He doesn't think the government should run the economy. First of all, he starts out with the optimistic view that we're okay. We're going to be all right here. And the economy is basically sound, and this Black Thursday, October the 24th, and then the next week, Black Monday, Black Tuesday, October the 29th, these things will pass and the economy's sound. Now, we've just seen, in the previous time I talked, that there were underlying causes that were profound that were not related to the stock market. The economy had some weaknesses, and as those popped up now, there were some profound problems. He thought that voluntary efforts like the soup kitchens that we saw and the bread lines could tide people through, and laissez-faire, the economy would right itself as people started to get back to work. The government could take a small role in what were known as public works. A public work is like paving Route 608, rebuilding a bridge across the Grand River. Something like that, building a courthouse, a new courthouse perhaps. That wouldn't be a federal one, but the other ones might be. And if the federal government would fund certain things that needed to be done in that way, and it would put people to work. Government-funded projects such as road paving, bridge building, etc. is a public work. So how did that work out? Well, not only did he have local soup kitchens and churches and volunteer groups get together, he got conferences together with industry leaders and said, hey, you're paying very little taxes. There's no taxes now because you're not producing anything. What you need to do is bring those people back to work and put them to work doing whatever it is you do. They get a paycheck and they will go spend it, and the engine of the society, the economic society, will fix itself in that case. But that didn't work. Remember that one of the underlying problem was that the workers, the normal, regular, everyday, common people didn't have enough money to go buy these things. There was a big gap between what they produced and what they could afford to buy. And putting them back to work, even at $5 a day, didn't change that. There was already a surplus because people hadn't been buying now ever since October of 1929. And there's nothing to buy. They can't buy anything. There's things on the shelves. There's things in the new car lot that you could buy if you could buy it. Making more of them just increases the surplus. And if someone is fortunate enough to be able to go buy something, it's one of those things that's been sitting there maybe for a year and a half or 2 years by 1931 not being sold. So it doesn't really stimulate the economy, and because it doesn't, after a short time, these companies say, well, we can't afford to do this. We're making whatever they're making, and we're not selling any, therefore we have to do what we did before, lay people off. Increasing supply when there was too much supply created a larger oversupply. It made the situation, in fact, worse. Public works projects. How did those work? Well, they worked well. There were a number of big projects that were initiated and were put people to work. But as big as these public works projects were, they weren't enough to accommodate the millions of Americans who were thrown out of their jobs. It was, to use a phrase, a drop in the bucket. And because it was a drop in the bucket, it didn't solve the problem. Public works, Hoover was happy to put them in place and put them into effect, but he was cautious about it because the government spending of money went against the principles of supply-side economics. We can't spend too much money here because what are we trying to do? Cut, and let business have the freedom to grow. If we cut more, maybe businesses will grow. So I'm a little bit worried about these public works projects, although they do put some people to work. So they were of limited value. The third thing he does is tries to encourage supply-side economics. Now, we did the chart. We'll come back to it in class. Cut. Pare government spending and let business function on its own. Laissez-faire. In the middle of the 1920s, when credit was easy to get and people were buying those refrigerators and those radios and those washing machines and all those appliances, yes, supply side worked. The more that was supplied, the more people gobbled them up. But not everybody gobbled them up. Farmers didn't, other people didn't. And as productivity got more and more, as more people were working, creating more supply and becoming consumers, still in all, there weren't enough consumers to consume all that was being supplied. A surplus was being built up that was not being purchased. And when 1929 rolled around and the easy credit froze, and there was no easy credit, and people stopped making payments on what they already owed, the surplus was huge. There was a backlog of things, much like those farmers who hadn't been selling anything for 10 years. Now business hasn't been selling anything for 2 or 3 years. Okay, now if we can try to put people to work and sell something, we really can't because we have such a huge surplus. It would take years to pay that down to justify building more, fill in the blank, any more refrigerators. Raising taxes would take more money from consumers and struggling businesses. That's anti-supply side economics. I'm against it anyway, and it doesn't make sense. Deficit spending would be increasing the debt, increasing the deficit and thus increasing the debt, which we're dead set against. We need a balanced budget. Be frugal just like everybody's household is frugal. And banks would be able to make loans to corporations so that they could stimulate the economy by investing. So the banks needed to be as sound as possible, but other than that, there's not a lot we want to do to tinker with the structure of the economy. Now, Hoover is very activist for supply side laissez-faire president. He sets up the National Credit Corporation, creating a pool of money that banks could tap into to make those loans and get businesses back up and expanding. But where'd the money come from? It came from the stronger banks. But there wasn't enough money to pull all the industries back out of this depression. The money was spent, things were tried, and consumers didn't consume because the consumers had no money. He has the government step in and take a role in this. There's another organization, government program called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Big operation to make loans to banks, to railroads, to financial corporations who would then make money available to manufacturers or other corporations, which in turn would put people to work, which would in turn cause the economy to get on its feet. Again, $238 million, a lot of money, but not enough to stimulate the economy to the extent where the people at the very bottom of that totem pole were getting jobs that would pay them and get them back in their houses or get them into a new house of some sort and get a job and be able to start buying something. Not enough, not enough. Now, the one thing that Hoover was dead set against was direct relief. That is money that would go to individual families who were in need. We could think of it as welfare, since they're not working at all, or we could think of it, since they had lost their jobs, as a form, which hadn't been invented yet, of unemployment. But he's against any of that because he thinks it will take away their rugged individualism. He wants to fix the structure of the economy, and then the workers will go back to work. You may remember Andrew Carnegie had a gospel of wealth. He didn't think that rich people should give money to poor people. He didn't think you should buy a man a fish to feed him for a day. He wanted to set up institutions that would allow these poor people to improve themselves, get a better job, teach them to fish. Teach a man to fish, don't give them a fish. Philanthropy, not direct charity. This is not the same thing, but it's an offshoot of that same idea. I want to strengthen the structure and have the corporations get back on their feet, and then the government will have its hands off, laissez-faire, put people back to work. Congress passed an Emergency Relief Act, and Hoover vetoed it. It was passed again over his veto at the very end of Hoover's presidency. Hoover was a believer in supply-side economics, and supply-side economics, which he said worked a little bit in good times of the 1920s, is terrible to deal with this kind of crash and burn economy of the early 1930s. And in fact, Hoover began to be criticized. This is not supply-side economic, it's trickle-down economics. We will give money to the banks are open, they will make loans to other financial institutions, they're open, they will make loans to corporations, and the corporations will put some people to work who will make some money. Pennies on the dollar, it seems like, and we're at the bottom of that chain. There was a very popular, actually entertainer at that time by the name of Will Rogers, a humorist, a funny man, not a comedian exactly, a commentator, humorist. And he coined the term. Money was all appropriated for the top in hopes it would trickle down to the needy. But he called it, he said, hey, that's one way to put it. The other way to put it is you feed the sparrows by giving grain to the horses. Now, if you've got horses and you've seen horses and you've seen sparrows, you know what he's talking about. I'm not going to elaborate here, but the point was that you had to wait for that grain to work its way through the horse before the sparrows had a chance to even get a little bit of it. And they had to grub around for that. So he was being sarcastic and critical, satirical and critical of trickle-down economics, of supply-side economics, and directly critical of Herbert Hoover. The failure to end the Depression alienated millions of Americans. Foreclosures, that is, unable to pay for your farm or your house or whatever possession you had, the bank would come in and say, okay, you didn't make payments, we're going to take it back over. Some foreclosures were stopped by neighbors who would stop the sheriff's sale by stopping the bidding at 10 cents and then giving the possession back to the person who was being foreclosed on. But most foreclosures displaced millions of people in the United States. Farmers began to destroy their own crops. Remember, the farmers wanted to save them in the 1880s until the price went up. Now the prices are so low, they're just going to dump the milk. They're going to burn the corn cobs because, hey, this isn't worth anything anyway, and maybe if there's no food and no milk, the prices will go up, and then we can make some money, perhaps. So, what was the result? The result was that conditions were bad, and there was no particular solution in sight. What was to be done? What was to be done to satisfy the revolting farmers and the Americans who are angry? Well, there's a presidential election coming up in 1932. And we'll see how that plays itself out and whether Hoover can prevail with his interventionist but still supply-side theories to help this economy, or whether someone else will replace him and go in a different direction. And we'll talk about that next time. Again, please subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can have access to these as soon as they are available. And again, be looking for them a day or so after that as they pop up on Google Classroom. You'll need them because some of this material we will lightly go over in class. And so this is your more detailed discussion of these things. All right. Have a good day.